A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ivana Smith, and welcome back to Just Politics News. Today, we are covering what many analysts are already calling one of the most extraordinary statements ever made by a sitting American president about a foreign nation in peacetime. President Donald Trump has delivered what can only be described as a direct military ultimatum to the Islamic Republic of Iran publicly, on the record, and in language that left almost no room for interpretation.
For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Among the regime's very first acts was to back a violent takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of American hostages for 444 days.
5 statements, each one more serious than the last. Lay down your weapons, you will be treated fairly. As the United States, we may suffer casualties in this operation. We will destroy Iran's missile program. We will destroy Iran's navy. We will never allow Iran to have a nuclear program. Today, we are going to break down every single one of those statements, what they mean, where they come from, what Iran said in response, and what this tells us about where this crisis is heading. Let's get into it. First, let's establish the context for these statements, because they did not come from a single speech or a single moment. They are the product of several weeks of escalating rhetoric, culminating in Trump's State of the Union address on February 24th, 2026, and a series of public statements made since then. In his State of the Union, the longest in modern American history at 108 minutes, Trump addressed Iran directly and at length. He said, and I'm paraphrasing carefully here, Iran was warned after last year's U.S. strikes on its nuclear facilities not to rebuild its weapons program, yet they continue. He said the United States is in negotiations with Iran, but has not yet heard what he called the secret words, meaning Iran committing on record to never building a nuclear weapon. He said his preference is diplomacy, but he left no ambiguity about the alternative. I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror to have a nuclear weapon, Trump said. As president, I will make peace wherever I can, but I will never hesitate to confront threats to America wherever we must. Then, speaking to reporters afterward and in subsequent public remarks, Trump went further. He acknowledged that an American military operation against Iran could result in American casualties, a remarkable admission from any commander-in-chief, because presidents rarely speak publicly about the human cost of military action before it begins. It signals that Trump is not treating this as a hypothetical. He stated that Iran's missile program would be destroyed. He stated that Iran's naval forces would be destroyed. He called on Iranian military personnel directly to lay down their weapons, promising fair treatment if they did. Taken together, these are not warnings. They are the outline of a military plan being described publicly in advance. To understand why these statements are so significant, we need to go back to June 22nd, 2025. On that date, the United States military launched Operation Midnight Hammer, a series of coordinated strikes on Iran's 3 main nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. 7 B-2 stealth bombers dropped 14 of the most powerful conventional bombs ever built, GBU-57 bunker busters directly into the underground ventilation shafts of those facilities. A submarine fired 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles simultaneously. Iran retaliated by attacking the Al Udeid air base in Qatar. Qatar intercepted the missiles. 2 days later, on June 24th, Trump announced a ceasefire. The 1-2-day conflict was over. But here is the critical detail that explains everything happening right now. The strikes damaged Iran's nuclear facilities significantly. But according to the United Nations' own nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, they did not permanently destroy Iran's nuclear program. Satellite imagery from late 2025 and early 2026 shows new construction activity at Natanz. Iran has been reinstalling centrifuges. It is rebuilding. Trump's own administration has sent mixed signals on this. The White House said the strikes obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said Iran was a week away from bomb-making material. Secretary Rubio acknowledged Iran is not currently enriching uranium, but said it is working toward that capability. CNN reported this week, citing U.S. intelligence sources, that Trump's public claim that Iran is building missiles that could soon reach the United States is not currently supported by U.S. intelligence assessments. The Defense Intelligence Agency's own unclassified report states that Iran could potentially develop such a capability by 2035 if it chose to pursue it. That is a 9-year window, not an imminent threat. We are presenting both of these data points, the administration's stated concerns and the intelligence community's assessment, because both are part of the public record, and you deserve to know both. Iran's response to Trump's statements has been direct, defiant, and in some moments deeply alarming. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei called Trump's claims about Iran's nuclear program and missile capabilities, quote, big lies. He invoked the phrase "repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth," attributing it to Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels, and accused the Trump administration of using the same technique. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi, who led Iran's delegation at the Geneva talks on Thursday, said after those talks that a fair, balanced, and equitable deal remains possible. But he also warned clearly that if the United States attacks Iran again, American military bases throughout the region would be legitimate targets for Iranian retaliation. If the U.S. attacks us, that is an act of aggression. What we do in response is an act of self-defense. Araghchi said, "Our missiles cannot hit the American soil, so obviously we have to hit the Americans' bases in the region." Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei's social media accounts last week posted an AI-generated video depicting Iranian forces sinking U.S. warships, including the USS Gerald R. Ford, the very carrier now positioned off Israel's coast. That is not a diplomatic signal. That is a psychological one. Iran's parliament speaker said Iran remains at the negotiating table, but will retaliate if attacked. Iran's President Pezeshkian has not made public statements ruling out further talks. The picture from Iran is this: publicly defiant, privately still negotiating, and making absolutely sure Washington understands the cost of military action. Trump's statements about destroying Iran's missile program and navy are not being made in a vacuum. The military assets to attempt exactly that are already in position. The U.S. currently has 2 full aircraft carrier strike groups in the region, the USS Gerald R. Ford, now near Israel's coast, and the USS Abraham Lincoln in the broader Middle East. That is more than 150 aircraft between the 2 carriers alone. F-35. Stealth fighters are moving from bases in Utah toward Europe, likely en route to the region. F-15E Strike Eagles from North Carolina are already in transit. Satellite imagery shows every parking space at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan is full. KC-46 refueling tankers are surging through the Azores, the mid-Atlantic staging point between America and Europe. The Pentagon's first dedicated kamikaze drone unit, Task Force Scorpion, has been confirmed as deployed in the Middle East. Military analysts describe this as the largest U.S. force concentration in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. If Trump ordered strikes tomorrow, the assets are there. The question is not capability, the question is decision. And on that question, Trump himself said this week that he has not made a final decision. He said he is not happy with negotiations. He said Iran is not willing to give us what we have to have. That is not the language of a president moving toward a deal. That is the language of a president keeping all options open and leaning in one direction. We want to be fair to both the case for pressure and the case for caution here, because both exist and both deserve to be heard. Supporters argue that maximum pressure, military, economic, and diplomatic simultaneously, is the only language Iran's leadership responds to. They point to the fact that Iran came to the negotiating table in the first place only after the June 2025 strikes. They argue that allowing Iran to rebuild its nuclear program after those strikes would render the entire operation meaningless. And they argue that a nuclear-armed Iran would fundamentally destabilize the Middle East and threaten U.S. allies, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, and others. Critics, including some within the U.S. intelligence community, foreign policy analysts, and members of Congress from both parties, argue that the public ultimatums are counterproductive. Professor Arash Rezi-Nejad of Tufts University wrote in Foreign Policy that Iran's leadership, under Supreme Leader Khamenei, operates from an identity of resistance rooted in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. In that worldview, capitulation under military pressure is not simply politically unacceptable, it is existentially dangerous to the regime's legitimacy. Khamenei will not publicly surrender, regardless of the military balance of power. Critics also note that analysts at the Christian Science Monitor and elsewhere warn that the U.S. may be fundamentally misreading Iran's leadership, assuming that enough military pressure will produce compliance, when the historical evidence suggests the opposite. The IAEA's own director, Rafael Grossi, said this week that a deal is still possible, but warned that the longer inspectors are kept out of Iran's facilities, the greater the risk of catastrophic miscalculation. Here is where things stand as of today, February 27th, 2026, and what we are watching closely. The Geneva talks ended Thursday without a deal, but both sides described them as cautiously positive. Technical level discussions are expected in Vienna next week at the IAEA. That diplomatic channel is still open, barely but open. Congress is moving toward a vote on war powers legislation that would require presidential approval from Congress before military action against Iran. Whether that vote happens and how it goes will tell us something critical about political will in Washington. Trump said Friday he has not made a final decision on military strikes. He said there will be additional discussions. That gives the Vienna talks real weight. They may be the last diplomatic moment before a decision is made. And the USS Gerald R. Ford is now positioned near Israel's coast, the most powerful conventional military asset on Earth, within striking range of Iran. The situation is serious. The statements Trump has made are historic. The military positioning is real. And the diplomatic window, while still open, is narrowing by the hour. To summarize everything we covered today, President Trump has publicly told Iran's military to lay down its weapons, acknowledged that American casualties are possible in an operation, and stated that the United States will destroy Iran's missile program, its navy, and will never allow a nuclear program. These statements came alongside the largest U.S. military buildup in the Middle East since 2003 and after nuclear talks in Geneva ended without a deal. Iran has called Trump's claims lies, warned it will strike U.S. bases if attacked, and said it remains open to a fair deal while rebuilding its nuclear facilities. The next 72 hours and the Vienna technical talks next week may tell us whether this ends at the negotiating table or somewhere much more dangerous. We will be here, covering every development as clearly and calmly as we can. I'm Ivana Smith. Stay informed, stay grounded, and I'll see you in the next one.